Blessings. Welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we're in Nehemiah chapters 11 through 13. Can't leave out 13. It's a good chapter. But starting in chapter 11, right in the first verse, we see that there's this lottery taking place to see who gets to live inside Jerusalem. Now, the significance of this, whatever, Jerusalem had been destroyed. The walls were knocked down. It wasn't just a real secure place, and it's on a mountain. So if you had crops in the valleys, you had to every day come down off the mountain and go to your crops. At the end of the day, go back up the mountain. And so people were just living out in the surrounding areas around Jerusalem because Jerusalem didn't offer any protection and there wasn't any real need to go back and live inside the city. Well, now they've got the walls rebuilt and they're trying to rebuild the government and remake Jerusalem this capital city. You need people living within the city and people to stand guard and work in the temple and all that. So this lottery was to see who was going to get to live in the city. Now, it's a great thing now because the city has walls and you get to live in a place that's protected. But the people who don't win the lottery still live out around the city, and they still, they've got their crops they tend to, their flocks of sheep, cattle, all these kinds of things, camels. And then the rest of chapter 11 talks about this ongoing process of organizing and managing the city, and putting people and things in place to make the city work. City government was pretty much already set out in the last 2 days reads, but today they're just kind of filling in the gaps with other things that a city has to have to be able to run, and they're appointing people to these positions. And then we get into chapter 12, and it's kind of like it's a big ceremony, but it's kind of like what a modern day ribbon cutting would be for a new building or a new business that's coming into your town. But they have this celebration for the walls to they bring singers in, big choirs, and they put them on either side of the wall, and it's a big deal. They have a big celebration for this. It's a big turning point in Jerusalem getting back to where it needed to be. So we see this going on with the celebration, and we've got to understand that Jerusalem's governmental system was all one system, and the city hall, if you will, the center of their government was the temple of God. So we don't think of our city government working like that today, but within this government that they have established, you had the religious leaders, and they were the tops. Nehemiah is obviously the governor, but in this government system, you've got, like I said, the religious system, you've got the civil government, you've got the criminal justice system, you've got every facet of your government is contained in this one mixture of everything. But at the head of it is the chief priest, and it's a religious system. So everything flows down from the religious system. We see that in chapter 12, verse 47, they start talking about the taxes for their government system. And the taxes went to the church, and their taxes went to pay the priest and pay the Levites and the guards and the people who would stand on the walls. And all of their system was paid for through the offerings and tithes to the church, which nowadays you couldn't get a city to pay for a church program. It'd cause a lawsuit, but that's the system they lived under. Then in chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, we see things take a turn for the worst. And we read a little bit later that Nehemiah had to go back to King Artaxerxes. He had to go back to the kingdom for something. So he was gone for a little period of time. And in that period of time, a lot of things changed. And he comes back in, I think it's chapter 6, and sees that, in just this short period of time, he may have been gone a year or two, who knows, but he comes back and he's like, y'all are already changing things and screwing things up. And one of the things is verses 1 through 3 talk about God saying that the Ammonites and the Moabites could not enter the assembly of God. He only named two people, and he was very specific about those two tribes and why. But this group of Israelites say, well, you know what, we're just going to extend that out to all foreigners. If you're not a Jew, you can't come in, and it's back to that. This is not what God intended. This is not moving God's purposes forward as far as having image bearers populate the world and having image bearers take God's rule out to the world and have the world ruled under the law and the system that God had put in place. They're closing everything off with the symbolism of these walls, and they're walling themselves in, and they're not sharing God with anybody. So this is where it winds up finishing the book of Nehemiah just like the book of Ezra finished, and it wasn't good. It was going in the right direction, but then it takes its turn for the worse while Nehemiah's gone. Nehemiah was a good leader. Um, we see in verse 17 he was constantly teaching and correcting behavior of the leaders and the people and putting them back on the right path and explaining God's word to them and saying, look, we're people who love God, and we're going to follow his word all the way. Chapter 13 verse 22, I thought it was interesting that he didn't want anybody to work on the Sabbath. The only people that could work on the Sabbath was the priest and the Levites. And so he replaced all the guards and the gatekeepers on the Sabbath with Levites who could do the job. So just a really neat read today. Tomorrow we're going to jump over into the book of Malachi and read the whole book. That's the only read for tomorrow is Malachi. So read it, see what kind of law enforcement takeaway you get, and meet me back here tomorrow. In the meantime, you guys be safe.